Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. Just a week more in June on the Range for 2023. This is a BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate Westerns. Western novels, Western short stories, good Westerns, bad Westerns, much, much worse Westerns. And I've been having a blast, just like I did last year. I've been learning a lot, exploring, finding a lot of new authors, revisiting some old authors, thinking more about what a Western is and what it isn't, how we deal with it, that sort of thing, sparked by my parameters at the beginning of June on the Range 2023, where I said that a Western is a story that takes place north of the Rio Grande, south of the Canadian border, west of either the Mississippi or especially the Missouri River, and east of the Rocky Mountains. And our inestimable host pointed out to me that that would rule out California. It's a place he seems rather fond of when he doesn't hate it. And actually, I feel the same way. I also am rather fond of California. And as I've learned in the course of June on the Range 2023, geographical parameters may have been a little bit premature because a lot of Westerns take place in California. I realized two things when I was doing the carousel spin for what I was going to read last night. One was that bit about geographical prejudice, that I had ruled out California. And the other is that I have so far not dealt with short stories in June on the Range. Michael K. Vaughan originally objected to my geographical parameters by pointing out that among all the other pulp westerny type stories that exist in California, one of the most famous, even now, is Zorro. And so I killed two birds with one stone last night, and I read a Zorro short story. I don't have any Zorro novels other than the Disney kids book that I just got. I don't have any. There was a run of Zorro paperbacks, cheap Zorro paperbacks. Oh my, it must be 50 years ago. All done by the creator. The creator did dozens and dozens and dozens of Zorro stories. And I had a lot of those paperbacks once upon a time. Haven't had them in forever, haven't seen them in the wild in forever. But it turns out, upon scanning my shelves, that I do have a Zorro short story. It's in Otto Penzler's big book of adventure stories. Look at this thing. Look at the size of this thing. There's a whole Tarzan novel in here. But there's a section on the Wild West where Penzler gives us first an introduction to the author, Johnston McCulley, who created Zorro and created a billion other things that I didn't know of and that I've never read. What's the list here? The Thunderbolt, the Crimson Clown, the Avenging Twins, the Mongoose, the Green Ghost, Thubway Tham, who steals wallets from people on the subway in nearly 100 stories. I would like to read The Avenging Twins or The Green Ghost, but Zorro was his most famous creation. And when Otto Penzler was putting this thing together, he was collecting lots and lots of stuff from great pulp adventure stories. So there's a Zorro story in here. It's called Zorro Deals with Treason. And because Penzler is such a great editor, such a genius, it actually reprints a pulp illustration from what I imagine. I imagine that this appeared where? Michael K. Vaughan probably know off the top of his head. All Story Weekly? Is that right? Is that where they all appeared? Well, anyway, I read this short story last night. I was a little bit overburdened with what I reflexively refer to as real reading last night. That's not true. That's a terrible way for me to think about it. I really should change that. All reading is real reading. But I mostly read new releases, and my new release docket last night was fairly heavy. It was fairly ambitious. It was a little bit more ambitious than I thought because one of the books ended up being a lot deeper than I expected it to be. So I gave myself a little leeway. I cut myself a little slack with June on the Range. Instead of reading a novel, I don't have any Zorro novels, I read this Zorro short story, Zorro Deals with Treason. And well, when you've got a big book like this, you're not expecting the contents to be good. You're not. We'll have this discussion again when Garb August rolls around, but you're expecting to enjoy the contents. You're not expecting the contents to be good. Okay, so Zorro deals with treason, opens with a group of Calientes, a group of tribesmen, local tribesmen in California, outside of the city that will a century later become L.A. They're all huddled around their fire one evening when Zorro rides into camp. The black mask, the black hat, the great voluminous black cloak, the enormous black stallion. He rides into their camp. They all love him. He is a Robin Hood type figure. He thwarts the depredations of the powerful, the governor and all of his corporals and captains and whatnot, and he fights for locals, for the indigenous people, for the Mexicans, against the tyrannical Spanish, and carpetbagging interlopers of all kinds. So of course they welcome him. They consider him a semi-mythical champion. But this Zorro has very different things to say to them than the Zorro they're accustomed to. He tells them, how long are you going to live groveling in the dirt like dogs? Why don't you band together and rise up against your oppressors? Burn their houses. Kill them all. And I will lead you to victory. This is very strange, I'm assuming. I'm not all that familiar with Zorro stories, but I'm assuming that by this point in the character's etiology, readers find that a little odd. Zorro doesn't do that sort of thing. And it turns out that Zorro doesn't, because Zorro's civilian identity is Don Diego, who is a young, handsome, dilettantish figure, a kind of a Bruce Wayne type playboy who reads poetry. He's known to read poetry. And we're told in the narrative that while that Zorro was appearing at that Caliente camp, Don Diego was at home in his father's hacienda in bed with a bad cold. So it can't be the real Zorro. And when the narrative picks up the next morning, Don Diego's feeling a little better. He's had a little homemade medicine, and he's wandering about the city, and he spends a little time with the town's one-eyed drunk, a former pirate, who tells him the story about how he heard from one of the natives that they were accosted the night before by Zorro in their camp, urging them to rebel against the colonial authorities. And Don Diego finds that very interesting, because it certainly wasn't him. It certainly wasn't Zorro. And the one-eyed town drunk also tells him that someone named Miguel Sebastiano, a friend of the powers that be, has recently entered town. And Zorro knows him. Don Diego knows that he is a famous mercenary swordsman, a ne'er-do-well, an ideal free man. And Zorro immediately Don Diego immediately puts two and two together and thinks that Sebastiano must be this fake Zorro. And that the whole point of this whole thing must be that word spreads, and that the real Zorro will go to the camp of the Calientes in order to find out from them what is happening here and maybe catch the fake Zorro in action. And the powers that be who have been hunting Zorro, they want him hanged. They don't, as a bandit, they don't want him continuing to put his mark on people and encourage the locals. They will set a trap. Not for the fake Zorro, but for the real one. And Don Diego sees through all of this, but he wants to reconnoiter just a bit. Goes to the local bar room, the local tap room, restaurant, whatever, with the fretful landlord and all. And in the corner, dicing and drinking, is Sebastiano and some of his low-life friends. And Don Diego is minding his own business. He is paying attention to everything. When Sebastiano comes over to him, intending to taunt him, as being a girly man. Intending to taunt him, telling him, it's said that you read poetry. And Don Diego is sarcastic and dismissive and says, well, it's no harm to read. It's good. It's actually good to read if you have the wit to understand what you're reading. This makes Sebastiano more and more angry, and Sebastiano leans into Zorro and says, so do you do needlework as well? A direct affront to Don Diego's masculinity. Don Diego lets it go. The local captain comes in to stop things from getting any more heated. But Don Diego his cold is suddenly better, and he is all the more determined to get to the bottom of what this is, to figure out how to right this situation. So he has to go to the camp. He has to go there, even though he knows that it's an obvious trap. And the story, it takes some twists and turns. They're not all that unpredictable. You can kind of guess that Sebastiano, as the fake Zorro, is going to be captured, and that the town is going to think they've caught the real Zorro, and the only way to let them know that's not true is for the captain and Sebastiano to admit to their plot. And they don't want to do that, and things are more and more and more tangled. Zorro, the real Zorro, does make an appearance. Nothing is ever made in this story, and as far as I can remember, very hazily, nothing is ever made in the Zorro novels about how on earth Zorro keeps his secret identity. How does he keep his secret identity? The pueblo that we're talking about is not all that big. And all of the Caliente seem to know that Don Diego is Zorro. All of them do. They don't get drunk one night and tell their wives or girlfriends. The word doesn't spread. The one-eyed town drunk seems to know that Don Diego is Zorro. He's drunk by 10 in the morning. He doesn't spill the beans ever. And also, Zorro has an enormous black stallion. A signature enormous black stallion. What people that drop off groceries at the Don Diego Hacienda don't ever notice that in addition to all the horses, there's a gigantic black stallion. And every time Zorro rides into town or down a canyon or something or other, he always finds a convenient patch of inky shadow in which to hide this enormous horse. It doesn't work that way at all. People would know right away that this... I often think, when I was reading this story, I was often thinking, well, somebody could do a really good parody of this in which everybody knows that Don Diego is Zorro. But then how would you explain why the local officials leave him alone? One element that doesn't come at all in this story, I remember a couple of novels, I think, where it does, which is that Don Diego's father is a political activist against the depredations of the Spanish. He's kind of a formidable, crusty old figure. I often think he would be worthy of a novel. He's often in opposition to the captain and the governor, but never donning a mask. He just opposes them, and he apparently is too wealthy and too powerful for them to do anything about that. That would be kind of fascinating to read about that. I think the closest that we get in a feint in that direction that I know of is the Antonio Banderas movie of Zorro, but that takes lots and lots of liberties. As far as we know, Zorro is not like the Phantom. This is not a thing that you hand down from generation to generation. But anyway, nobody seems to notice that Don Diego, in addition to reading poetry and having head coals and wearing the finest silk, also has Zorro Stallion in his corral. Nobody seems to notice that. And through these twists and turns, eventually we get to Zorro confronting the captain and Sebastiano. Confronting them with... There are always soldiers around in any room, and they never seem to do anything. They always seem like they're afraid to approach Zorro, much less fight him. This guy is in crowded little rooms. He could easily be overcome by force of numbers at any point in any short story or novel. The numbers don't happen because the soldiers lose their nerve, I guess. But at the climax, Zorro defends his good name to the captain, says, you know, I taunt the rich and I protect the poor, but I would never foment rebellion. What is what he does other than fomenting rebellion? It's like, I guess that's the title here. Zorro deals with treason. There really isn't any treason in this book, except the theoretical kind proposed by the fake Zorro. But is it treason? What he proposes is an uprising. The natives, the Mexicans, the Calientes, they've never sworn loyalty to the governor or to the government of Spain. They're not committing treason. They're trying to commit a coup, or at least that's what the fake Zorro seems to want them to do. But it's the least convincing moment in the book, in the short story, and this short story has plenty of unconvincing moments. The least convincing moment in the whole thing is Zorro trying to thread that needle, the real Zorro, trying to thread that needle and make some case that he is not a traitor, that he would never do such a thing. Of course, no one knows that. All it needs is one Caliente who doesn't like Zorro to say, yeah, he has said that to us often. No one's there. No one can verify one way or another. But at the climax, Zorro faces off against this plot. He reveals it, says, "Look, here I am. I'm the real Zorro." And the townspeople seem irate and okay with that. But there's one more element. There's one more thing that needs to be dealt with, quite apart from the fake Zorro. There's the besmirching of honor. There's Zorro versus Sebastiano, this sellsword from out of town. And so the story ends with a fight. It ends with a sword fight between the two men, which underscores something that if you're a fan of the old Zorro TV show from Disney, or maybe a Zorro cartoon, you might forget. I forgot until I read this story and was viscerally reminded that Zorro does not make his mark on people's shirts. So, or on their pants, so that their pants fall down, or on the wooden door, like is on the end papers of that hardcover Zorro children's hardcover. He marks their faces. He cuts a Z in their faces with 3 different strikes. So it's not za za za. It's in the course of a sword fight. He will do one, then the other, then a cross down the side like that, and you wear that forever. One of the characters in this short story who is faced with combat with Zorro is horrified at the prospect that he will be marked for life. I'd forgotten that. There are elements here that would... I mean, that's not treason against the Spanish authorities, but surely that is a hanging offense. Even if you didn't do it to an oppressive Spanish overlord, surely that is still a hanging offense. But I'd forgotten that. And that, of course, happens in the course of the climactic battle between Zorro and Sebastiano. It's not just that he's going to beat this guy. It's that he's going to mark him with the mark of Zorro. But it doesn't matter, because Sebastiano is not going to walk away. He's not going to accept defeat. So it becomes a fight to the death. And Sebastiano, gets 3 inches of finely tapered Spanish steel right in his heart, and he lets out a sigh. The narrative tells us he doesn't scream or anything. He lets out a sigh and sort of slumps down to the ground, dying. And Zorro stoops in close so that no one else in the room can hear him and says, "Needlework, senor." And Sebastiano, he hears that, and suddenly he knows, and he tries to say, "All of you, you must listen. Zorro is..." But he croaks before he can say Don Diego. That was a neat moment. That was well done. I did sort of see that coming, but still, it was well orchestrated. Although, we're talking about a room that's 10 feet by 10 feet. Again, everyone would have heard that. Just like everyone would have heard the original taunt. I honestly do think that no one in the City of Angels doesn't know that Don Diego is Zorro, but I still enjoyed it. It was really, really good. I don't know that it really fits with a whole lot of what we think of as a Western. True, it takes place at the time that Westerns are taking place on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, but I don't know. I mean, Zorro was the first person that Michael K. Vaughan went to defend Californian soil in June on the Range, but it didn't strike me much like a Western. It's in the Western part of this book. But it I don't know, it struck me much more like a Robin Hood story. But I really enjoyed it. And it sort of fueled my desire to have, or to read or reread an actual Zorro novel. So not a short story, and also not that Disney kids book that one of you was kind enough to send me, but one of the actual novels. What does Penzler say? This guy wrote lots of these things, right? The film with Douglas Fairbanks was an instant success and induced the author to continue to write about his hero. It became a signature part of more than 60 additional novels, stories, and novellas. So there's a lot of Zorro out there. Is there, for instance, a big fat volume? Maybe? Like there is with Conan or H.P. Lovecraft? Is there a big fat volume of Zorro that I've just never even known to look for? I've certainly never seen it in a bookstore. Certainly it did not come out in any mainstream U.S. press in the last 30 years, but there are other presses. I might have missed it. I've never seen anything like that at the Brattle Bookshop. But now, this is the thing I love about constantly reading, is now a gap has opened up, a want, a need has opened up in my reading. I suddenly want to fill that need with Zorro. And this is exactly the situation in which I say the Brattle will provide. Now that I have it, I have a gap that I didn't have yesterday. So I gather that a lot of you, when gaps like that open up, or you suddenly have an itch that you want to scratch, I gather that a lot of you go to eBay for that, or Alibris or something like that. I don't have the reflex to do that because I have a really good used bookstore, so I'm not. But a lot of you have suggested that I try other sites other than eBay, like the Amazon Marketplace. So maybe I should try that to see what kind of Zorro paperbacks are out there. I have no idea. I don't actually want the paperbacks so much as I want a big fat anthology, like 800,000 pages that has tons and tons of Zorro stuff. I wonder how much. What is this guy's name again? Johnston McCulley. I wonder how many of his Zorro things could be put together in one big book like this with double columns. I wonder how many of them would fit in there. Probably a lot. But anyway, if all of the Zorro short stories and novels are this dorky, then I probably want to read more of them. So I have a little time, because Garb August isn't until August, and these things are certainly trash. So I have a little time. The Brattle has time to provide me with a couple of Zorro books. But anyway, that's my June on the Range for today. It was a short story. It was a pretty enjoyable short story. But then I have yet to encounter a dud in any of Otto Penzler's big books. So I went into it expecting that I would like it. Even if I thought it was dumb, I expected that I would like it, and I did. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'm going to go, I think, probably back to a novel tonight, but I'll report back tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.